The frantic knocking brought Joseph Emery Purington to his front door. The former corporal with Company D of the 3rd Maine Infantry Regiment found one of his father's co-workers at Deering and Donnell, a shipyard on Washington Street in Bath, Maine, on his front stoop. Emery recognized him as Ebenezer Allen. "It's your father," Allen said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's in trouble." Pausing long enough only to grab his hat, Joseph followed Allen, and they hightailed it to his father's neglected 2-room dwelling on High Street. His father's isolated house resembled a shack, set back from the road in front of a pine forest and a rocky ledge. The front door was ajar. Bursting through the doorway, Emery found his 74-year-old father lying face down on the plank floor. His father lay on his right side with his arm pinned behind his back. He was unconscious and covered in blood and vomit. As they helped his father, Emery noticed extensive bruises on his father's face. His father's valise, usually kept locked and hidden, lay open on the floor, empty. His wallet was also missing. There was no money in the house. It was all gone. 2 days later, the elderly Joseph Higgins Purington died without regaining consciousness. The newspaper headlines in Bath and across Maine cried murder. The public wanted answers. Unfortunately, they never got any. Until today. Because today on Company D, we're going to try and solve a murder. A murder that took place 143 years ago. Hello and welcome back to Company D, the history podcast that explores the personal stories of the average soldier who fought in the American Civil War. Our mission at Company D is to share the compelling true life stories of individual soldiers from one regiment, the 3rd Maine Infantry Regiment, and one company within the 3rd, Company D. One regiment, one company, countless stories. The soldiers of Company D of the 3rd Maine came from mid-coast Maine, primarily around the shipbuilding city of Bath. These men were farmers, fishermen, and carpenters until they donned the blue uniform of the United States Army and fought to bring an end to slavery and reunite the United States of America. We're not interested in the big history of the American Civil War, the politics, military tactics, and the stories of the politicians and the generals. We'll leave that to more qualified experts. We're here for the real people, the soldiers and their families who lived through one of the most seismic events in U.S. history, and how the war and its aftermath forever changed their lives. This is micro-history at its finest. At least we hope it is. Why did we choose to focus on Company D of the 3rd Maine? Because for us, this is personal. My great-great-grandfather, Charles F. Snell, volunteered with them. Charles left behind a diary of his experiences in the war, which has become the inspirational text for this podcast. I'm your host, George F. Snell III, because 2 is company and 3 is a podcast. Today on Company D, we're venturing into crime drama. We're bringing you a dark and mysterious true life story filled with morally ambiguous characters and a gritty urban setting. This is a true story, but one that could have been penned by 2 of our favorite crime writers, Peter Swanson and S.A. Crosby. Let's call today's episode Company D Noir. A cantankerous old man, rumored to be a wealthy miser, and who has strained relations with his dysfunctional family. is found battered and bloody on the floor of his isolated house. The old man's wallet is missing, his locked valise is opened and empty, and the premises have been cleared of all the cash he allegedly hoarded inside. What happened to Corporal Joseph Emery Purington's elderly father on the rain-soaked night of September 27, 1882, has remained a mystery for more than 143 years. Despite pressure from newspapers, politicians, and the family, no one has ever solved the case, and it faded into history. But that ends today. Today on Company D, we play gumshoe. We put on our trench coat and deerstalker cap. We dust off our magnifying glass and our long-stemmed cherry wood pipe, because we're going to play the part of Sherlock Holmes and try to solve a centuries-old mystery. Who killed Old Man Purington and why? To solve this crime, we will re-examine the evidence, analyze the eyewitness testimony, and utilize modern technology to assist us in solving what we're calling the mystery of the Mangled Miser. In this episode, our 10th and the last of our first season, we're going to try and uncover what truly happened to Joseph Higgins Purington in 1882 and identify the most likely suspect. The game, my friends, is afoot. Chapter 1: A Bungled Investigation. Before we begin, it's important to understand why the case was never solved in the first place. Let's take a closer look at the crime scene and the law enforcement situation in Bath, Maine in 1882, the year 74-year-old Joseph Higgins Purington was found beaten on the floor of his house. This might help explain why the case has remained unsolved for 143 years. Bath's population in the 1880s was nearly 8,000. The city was recovering from a decline in residents, mainly due to the significant death toll from the American Civil War. From 1860 to 1870, the city's population dropped by almost 9%, marking its first population decrease in more than 70 years. As a port city, Bath had its share of boarding houses, taverns, gambling dens, and brothels. Brawls and public intoxication, despite a prohibition against alcohol in Maine, were not uncommon. The late 19th century was significantly more violent than the United States is today. The murder rate for the century was 20 per 100,000 people. Murders dropped to 10 in 100,000 in the 20th century. Today, the rate is about 6 in 100,000. You were 3 times more likely to be murdered in the 19th century than you are today. However, crime fighting was still in its early stages. In the 1880s, police departments were not professional organizations. Like most cities of its size, Bath had a politically appointed city marshal who reported to the mayor and the city alderman. He oversaw a team of constables and night watchmen who primarily broke up fights, arrested drunks, conducted liquor raids, and generally enforced local ordinances, such as leash laws. They were amateurs with no professional standards or training. Forensic investigations were just beginning to develop, with only a few large city departments starting to adopt modern crime-solving techniques like fingerprinting, photography, and interview procedures. In 1882, Bath City Marshal was William H. Gilman, a 58-year-old teamster. He oversaw 20 constables and night watchmen. A war veteran, Gilman served 9 months as a wagoner with the 21st Maine Infantry Regiment. He was city marshal for just 1 year, the year that Old Man Purington died. Gilman was appointed marshal in the winter of 1882 and spent most of the spring in an ugly feud with his night watch captain, James Bailey. Bailey, a 60-year-old former tugboat captain, had lost his arm in a gun accident in 1849. Gilman and Bailey despised each other. Their feud got weird and public in May during an alderman hearing. Gilman accused Bailey of insubordination, dishonesty, and slander. In response, Bailey claimed that Gilman possessed low morals and sought the company of, quote, lewd women, unquote. He meant prostitutes. Bailey alleged that at least 2 women had approached him for assistance in deterring Marshal Gilman's unwanted advances. Bailey even reported Gilman's alleged sexual misconduct to the mayor. On a side note, my great-great-granduncle, George Snell, who operated a furniture store on Front Street in Bath, was a witness at the hearing. George was among several people who saw Gilman and Bailey shouting at each other on the street. In a narrow vote, the alderman sided with Marshal Gilman, dismissing Bailey's accusations as unfounded. Bailey ended up being suspended from his role as night watch captain. Yet Bailey was reinstated several months later and succeeded Gilman as city marshal the following year. But after the scandal, Gilman kept himself busy arresting drunks, conducting liquor raids, and chasing after boys sledding on city streets. When Old Man Purington was found unconscious and bloody in his house in September, Gilman was clearly over his head in conducting a murder investigation, not to mention distracted. Maine newspapers widely criticized him for his investigation into the Purington case. No one was ever arrested, and the investigation couldn't even determine whether, in fact, Old Man Purington was even the victim of a crime. These disappointing results were likely the main reason Gilman was marshal for just 1 year before being replaced by the man he fired. Chapter 2. Was Joseph Higgins Purington even murdered? The Bath coroner's jury could not reach a decisive conclusion about whether Old Man Purington was a crime victim, leaving his family, the city's politicians, the general public, and the region's newspapers baffled and then angry. The jury's verdict read, quote, that the said Joseph H. Purington came to his death Friday, September 29th, A.D. 1882, from concussion of the brain, produced by wounds received between Monday evening, September 25th, and Wednesday afternoon, September 27th. But by what means to the jurors? Unknown, unquote. The coroner's report left open the possibility that Old Man Purington could have suffered a seizure and struck his head on the stove while collapsing to the floor. Most people roundly rejected the jury's conclusion due to Purington's missing wallet, his open valets, his missing cash, and the sheer extent of the blood and bruises on his head, shoulders, and face. The public outcry was swift. Bath's mayor, James Lenyard, and the Board of Aldermen quickly authorized a reward of $500 for the discovery of evidence that would lead to the conviction of, quote, the person or persons who committed the assault on Joseph Purington or who were accessory to his death, unquote. Given the preponderance of evidence, it seemed evident to us at Company D that Old Man Purington was the victim of a homicide. But we wanted to be sure. So we decided to collect all the available evidence and run it through a generative AI platform. We uploaded more than a dozen articles summarizing the case, the coroner's report, and the eyewitness testimony, and then asked ChatGPT if Joseph Higgins Purington was murdered. Here's what our robot overlord came to a conclusion on.
Based on the available evidence, there is a 97% probability that Joseph H. Purington was murdered. While the coroner's inquest did not entirely rule out the possibility of a fall as the cause of death, that explanation is undermined by the nature of Mr. Purington's injuries: multiple blunt force wounds inconsistent with a typical accidental fall, and by the suspicious circumstances surrounding the discovery of his body, including the open and emptied valise where he was known to keep money. The combination of violent trauma, missing cash, and lack of other plausible accidental scenarios strongly supports the conclusion that his death was the result of intentional foul play.
I want to stress that generative AI is not conclusive evidence. But based on everything we can find on the case, we think it's safe to conclude that yes, Joseph Higgins Purington was murdered. Chapter 3. The Victim.
Kids, no good.
In 1882, Joseph Higgins Purington was 74 years old. Despite his advanced age, he worked as a ship's carpenter at Donald and Deering's shipyard on Washington Street in the city's South End. He also owned an interest in 3 trading ships based in Bath. He was widely considered to be a wealthy miser, living below his means in a low-slung hut on High Street that he had built himself. Old man Purington had separated from his wife, Joanna Spinney, for at least 3 years. Joanna said she frequently visited her estranged husband to cook his meals and clean up after him. Joanna lived with her son and daughter a short distance away on Middle Street. She blamed her separation from her husband on incompatibility of temper. Old man Purington and his son, Joseph Emery, also had a strained relationship. Emery said that although he rarely argued with his father, they had an unfriendly relationship. He called his father an eccentric and a difficult person to get along with. Neighbors often noticed old man Purington coming in and out of his house. They said he kept to himself and had an unusual walking style, with his head bobbing forward in a particular manner as he walked. Most had heard the rumors that he had money hidden inside his house, but they generally viewed him as honest and hardworking. Old man Purington was born on October 8, 1808, into a large farming family on the outskirts of Bath. At the time of Joseph's birth, Bath was swiftly transforming from a rural community along the Kennebec River into a shipbuilding boomtown. By 1850, the city's population would quadruple from 2,000 to nearly 8,000 people. When he was 24, old man Purington married Joanna Spinney from Georgetown, Maine. 19-year-old Joanna was the 6th of 8 children born to fisherman Nicholas Spinney and his wife Susanna Burgess. Together, old man Purington and Joanna had 5 children: Joseph Emery, Susan, Sarah, Margaret, and Alva. During the California gold rush in the late 1840s, old man Purington spent a couple of years in California. At that time, he was in his late 30s and left behind his wife and 5 children. Hundreds of thousands of men, many from Maine, traveled to California in the hopes of striking it rich. Rumors suggested that when old man Purington finally returned to Bath in 1850, he came back with a small fortune. Old man Purington worked as a carpenter in the shipyards and also managed to invest in ownership stakes in several trading schooners. The family experienced a traumatic period in June of 1853 when the 2 youngest Purington children, Margaret and Alva, died within 2 weeks of each other. The culprit was likely a contagious disease such as diphtheria or typhoid fever, but no cause of death was given for either child. Margaret was 9 and Alva was 5 when they were buried at Maple Grove Cemetery. Old man Purington lived in Bath, raised his 3 remaining children, and worked in the shipyards. When he separated from his wife around 1879, old man Purington lived alone in his small house on High Street and rarely saw his family. Chapter 4. The Oldest Son. Old man Purington's eldest son was Joseph Emery Purington. He went by his middle name of Emery. He was born on July 8, 1833. Emery graduated from high school in Bath and, like his father, spent most of his life working as a ship's carpenter. In 1861, Emery enlisted in Company D of the 3rd Maine as a private. When he volunteered, he was 27 years old, standing 5 feet 7 inches tall, with hazel eyes, dark hair, and a dark complexion. His looks favored his mother's side of the family. Emery had an eventful 3 years with Company D, and like his father, seemed to possess a talent for being in the wrong place at the right time. Shortly after enlisting, Emery claimed that he had not been paid his signing bonus of $26, a claim refuted by his enlistment officer, who insisted he had paid Emery personally. It's unclear how that dispute was resolved. After the Union defeat at the Second Battle of Bull Run in August of 1862, the 3rd Maine was retreating with the rest of Union forces when the Confederates cut them off at Chantilly. The 3rd Maine engaged in heavy fighting, with 4 killed, 38 wounded, and 8 missing. Emory was initially reported killed in action. At least 2 news articles were published in local newspapers reporting that Emory was dead. The news must have been devastating for his parents and 2 surviving sisters. However, he was only missing in action and soon turned up. 1 month after that error, Emory was promoted to corporal. Emory would disappear again 8 months later on May 5, 1863, during an ill-fated midnight attack during the Battle of Chancellorsville. Chancellorsville was another disastrous loss for U.S. forces in Virginia. At dusk, the rebels obliterated the 11th Corps, and Union General Joseph Hooker, desperate for his troops not to be completely overrun, launched a series of counterattacks. At 9 p.m., huddled around campfires in the mounting darkness of the dense wilderness woods, the 3rd Maine received orders for a midnight offensive. The news unsettled many of the men, who were worried about fighting in the darkness amid the tangles of vegetation. Some of the men wrote farewell letters to their families, pinning them to their sack coats. They affixed their bayonets in the light of a full moon. The goal was to take a breastwork near Plank Road. It was a terrible charge. The well-fortified Confederates, many from the 18th North Carolina Regiment, waited for the 3rd to leave the woods to an open pasture bathed in moonlight before opening fire. Corporal Charles F. Snell of Company D remembered the fight this way. About 11 o'clock at night, our brigade was put in front and ordered to charge into the woods and drive the rebels back so as to make connection with the rest of the army. Snell continued, "It was done, and a terrible charge it was, too. The rebels did not fire till we got right onto them, and then they gave us a volley which I shall never forget." The 3rd Maine suffered severe losses of 4 men killed, 17 wounded, and 42 missing. Even worse, as the 3rd Maine fell back toward their own lines, it was fired upon by the Union Army's 12th Corps, who mistook them for an enemy charge. Emory and Private George Bliss of Company D went missing in this chaos. Once again, it's unclear what exactly happened to Emory. He fell off the muster rolls of Company D after being listed as missing in action following Chancellorsville. 2 months later, he was absent from Company D at the Battle of Gettysburg. Both Emory and Bliss returned to the company on November 1st. Both of them were likely captured by Confederates, held as prisoners, and released as part of a prisoner exchange. But there's no documentation of that, so we don't know actually what happened to them while they were missing. At the Battle of the Wilderness on May 5, 1864, Emory was captured once again. Late in the afternoon, the 3rd Maine was ordered forward as reinforcements to stabilize the Union front line, only to run straight into the 12th North Carolina Infantry Regiment. Emory was captured at the same time as Corporal Charles Snell. On that day, Snell wrote in his diary, "About 3 o'clock p.m., the first day's fight commenced. Our regiment advanced in the woods. It got nearly surrounded. I was taken prisoner by the 12th North Carolina, marched through rebel lines about 10 miles, and camped down for the night." Emory and Snell were imprisoned together at Andersonville Prison in Georgia and the Florence Stockade in Florence, South Carolina, until December 5, 1864. 7 grueling months of captivity. Emory was officially discharged from the 3rd Maine on February 23, 1865, and returned to Bath in poor health, struggling to find steady employment as a result. He was forced to move back in with his parents and younger sister Sarah. Emory continued to have health issues, and while he found work as a carpenter, he struggled financially. He filed a disability claim with the U.S. government in 1878 and made several dubious claims in his paperwork that he had been shot 3 times, fought in more than 23 battles, and that he achieved the rank of sergeant. There's no evidence of any of those claims being true. After years of disputes with the U.S. government, Emery finally secured a meager pension on March 14, 1882, 6 months before his father was killed. He attempted to receive back pay dating to 1878, but he was denied. In the months leading up to his father's murder, Emery was involved in a financial dispute with his father regarding the future of his sister's children. We'll get into the details about that situation in a moment. But there is little doubt that, given his own financial challenges, his close familiarity with his father's house and possessions, and his complicated relationship with his father, Joseph Emery Purington is a suspect in his father's murder. Chapter 5. The Oldest Daughter. Susan Elizabeth Purington was the oldest daughter of Old Man Purington and his wife Joanna. She was born on September 9, 1835 in Bath. Susan, who worked as a tailor, lived with her parents well into her 20s. At some point, she met an Irish-born pressman named Michael J. Kelly. Kelly was Roman Catholic and grew up in Boston. He was baptized there on April 23, 1837. The reasons and manner of Kelly's move from Boston to Bath remain unclear, but he arrived shortly after a period of intense prejudice against Catholics, especially Irish Catholics, in Bath. Throughout the 1850s, Bath saw several anti-Catholic incidents, including a riot on July 6, 1854, when a mob set fire to the Old South Church, a church that had recently been purchased by Irish Catholics. The police made no arrests, and the fire department gave the arsonist 3 cheers of support. The tensions calmed once the Civil War started, but it wasn't easy being Irish Catholic in Bath when Michael J. Kelly arrived. It's unclear how receptive Susan's family was to her being romantically linked to an Irish Catholic. Kelly returned to Boston and enlisted in the U.S. Navy as a substitute on June 15, 1864. He had made a financial arrangement with someone who had been drafted into military service to take their place for a price. Substitutes were usually paid around $300 to take the draftee's slot. Whomever paid for Kelly, however, got a bad deal. Kelly deserted from the USS Ohio after serving for just 6 months, a practice known as bounty jumping. The practice was illegal, and desertion was punishable by death. Yet despite the consequences, many substitutes, often known derogatorily as hirelings, often collected their bounties and bailed. Kelly appears to have been one of these men. After deserting, Kelly fled to Boston, where Susan met him. They married in a Catholic ceremony on July 23, 1865, after the war had ended, and Kelly was less likely to face arrest or prosecution for desertion. They then returned to Bath and had 2 children, Margaret, born in 1866, and Alva, born in 1868. Susan named the kids after her 2 deceased siblings. Kelly likely faced scorn from Susan's family, not only for being a foreigner and a Catholic, but for his criminal behavior during the war. After all, Susan's brother, Emery, was honorably discharged as a corporal and spent a significant amount of time in Confederate prisons. Regardless, the marriage didn't last long. Kelly separated from Susan before 1870. Susan moved next door to her father, whose household included her mother, brother Emery, and her sister Sarah. Her father supported Susan as she raised her 2 children. Kelly remained in Bath, where he continued to work as a pressman. At some point, he was in such dire financial shape that he borrowed money from his father-in-law, Old Man Purington, and promptly fled the state, most likely to Boston, officially abandoning his wife and 2 children and taking his unpaid debt to Old Man Purington with him. In 1877, Old Man Purington sued his son-in-law, demanding that Kelly repay his debt of more than $1,000. Old Man Purington was so angry that he also demanded an additional $1,500 in damages. Kelly was ordered to appear in court in Bath within 30 days. However, he never showed up, and the debt or damages were apparently never repaid. Tension was rising between Kelly and Old Man Purington. Their situation was about to get worse. Chapter 6: A Death in the Family. Shortly after suing Kelly, Old Man Purington moved into his hut away from the rest of his family, although he had Susan and her 2 children reside with him. The rest of his family, his wife, son, and other daughter, lived elsewhere. His wife Joanna stopped in several times a week to cook and clean for him. In 1882, Kelly filed for divorce from Susan. However, before the case could be heard in court, Susan died unexpectedly on September 2nd, 1882. She left behind her 16-year-old daughter Margaret and her 14-year-old son Alva. It's unclear whether Kelly wanted custody of his children, but it seems unlikely given that he had been living in Boston without them for several years. Old Man Purington covered the cost of Susan's funeral and burial, which amounted to $40. The family decided that Emery and Sarah would raise their niece and nephew, with Old Man Purington financing their upbringing. During the coroner's inquest into his father's death, Emery testified that Kelly was an unfit father and had not been in Bath for nearly 8 years. Emotions were running high in the Purington family. Susan was dead, leaving behind a messy and complicated domestic situation. Her husband, whom the family disliked immensely, was lurking around Bath, refusing to take responsibility for burying his wife or providing for his children. Why had Kelly returned at all? He was being sued for thousands of dollars by Old Man Purington. He had initiated formal divorce proceedings against Susan before she died. In fact, the court would grant the divorce in December, despite the fact that Susan was already dead. And the Purington family clearly disliked him. But there he was, back in Bath. Did the bitter and bankrupt Michael J. Kelly visit Old Man Purington on the night of his death? Did Michael Kelly kill and rob his estranged father-in-law? We know one thing. Right after Old Man Purington was killed, Michael Kelly went back to Boston. No doubt about it, Michael Kelly is a suspect. Chapter 7: The Lead Up. The last time Emery saw his father was on Saturday, September 23rd. Their paths crossed at the Lower Methodist Church after 5 p.m. at dusk, as a waxing gibbous moon rose over the church steeple. We were not exactly friendly, Emery confessed during the coroner's inquest, but we never quarreled. Our unfriendliness was the result of mere differences in opinion. Emery continued. He was an eccentric man, particular and hard to get acquainted with. On Monday, September 25th, a neighbor was the last person to see Old Man Purington before he was attacked. The old man walked at dusk as it started to rain towards his house. The weekend passed. Old Man Purington didn't show up for work on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. That's when his co-workers decided to check on him. Ebenezer Allen and David Clark found him in a bloody heap on the floor, still alive. They called for a doctor and ran to fetch Emery. Old Man Purington was still wearing his rubbers, and there was no doubt in their minds that he had been lying on the floor since he had last been seen on that stormy Monday night. Emery was convinced his father had been attacked and robbed. They left him to die, in my opinion, he said at the coroner's inquest. Emery said the robber would have needed to injure his father because Old Man Purington was a spunky old man and would have, quote, fought as long as there was breath in him, unquote. Old Man Purington lingered but never regained his senses. He died at noon on Friday, September 29th. Chapter 8: Company D makes a verdict. It's been 143 years since Joseph Higgins Purington was found face down on the floor of his High Street shack, bloody, broken, and robbed. In all of that time, no one has ever been held accountable. No trial, no suspect, no confession, just silence and speculation. But history doesn't forget, and neither do we. We've already determined with the help of modern technology that old man Purington was murdered. He was attacked, deliberately, violently, and with purpose. The open valise, the missing wallet, the bruises, the blood, a fall just doesn't explain all that. Old man Purington was beaten and left to die. The Bath police in 1882 didn't have the tools, or perhaps the will, to solve this crime. But we do. Let's turn back to modern technology. We fed all the evidence, the case files, the newspaper articles, the coroner's report, the court and inquest information back into ChatGPT and asked it to determine who killed old man Purington. Keep in mind, this is speculation for entertainment purposes only. We can't know definitively who killed old man Purington, and neither can an AI program. That said, let's see what our robot overlords came back with. First, let's look at who ChatGPT eliminated. Joseph Emery Purington, the son. Why? We'll let the robot explain.
Joseph Emery Purington didn't kill his father because he had nothing to gain, fully cooperated with the investigation, and was called to the scene by another witness, not discovered there himself. His actions showed urgency, not guilt, and unlike others, he wasn't desperate or hiding anything.
We have to agree. Now let's turn to who ChatGPT believes is the murderer.
Michael J. Kelly is the most likely killer because he had the strongest motive, the greatest desperation, and perfect opportunity. Just weeks after his estranged wife's death, paid for by Joseph H. Purington, Kelly returned to Bath for the first time in years, still owing his father-in-law thousands of dollars from an old lawsuit. He knew where Purington kept his cash, had no custody of his children, and faced both humiliation and financial ruin. The robbery of the valise and wallet, combined with Kelly's sudden reappearance and rapid disappearance, make him the only figure who clearly fits motive, means, and opportunity.
Well, there you have it. Our own Minority Report verdict. Michael J. Kelly. Let us know what you think of the verdict, or if you have one of your own. We'll end episode 10 and the first season of Company D with this quote from Sherlock Holmes. When you have eliminated all which is impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Thanks for listening to the final episode of our first season on Company D. We really appreciate your support in bringing these stories to life. Don't worry, we're already researching and writing season 2. But first, we're going to be holding a fundraiser campaign on Kickstarter. We'll let you know the details soon. Season 2 is scheduled to start this spring with 14 brand new true life stories. One regiment, one company, countless stories. Be sure to visit our website at companydpodcast.com to take a peek at the case files and notes on the case of the mystery of the Mangled Miser. We love receiving your questions and comments and feedback. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and on Blue Sky. I'm your host, George F. Snell III. See you next time. And remember, don't be criminal, be civil.
Company D is a product of Dark Party Productions, all rights reserved. Unauthorized retention, duplication, distribution, or modification of copyrighted materials is strictly prohibited by law. Company D is written, hosted, and produced by George F. Snell III. Our editor and co-producer is Jay Brewer. The Company D theme music was written and composed by Jay Brewer. Sound effects and additional music were provided under Creative Commons License 0 by Freesound, Sound Bible, and the Library of Congress. We'd also like to thank Richard Moore for his Civil War battle sounds on Freesound. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute professional advice. The content is provided as is with no guarantees of accuracy, completeness, or timeliness.